Hey folks, welcome to our water photography workshop with Todd Glaser. My name is Troy Yasuda. I'm coming to you from the Patagonia Cardiff shop. For those who don't know Todd, he is a professional water photographer, and if you picked up a magazine, Surfer Magazine or Surfer's Journal in the last decade, you've most likely looked at one of his cover shots and seen many of his pictures in there. Today he's going to get real techie with you guys about water photography, and I'm really excited about it because I always like especially the water in water photography, where Todd's swimming around in real shallow waters over a coral reef with huge waves, and just the thought of like swimming around in those waves, let alone holding a water housing, just amazes me. And for the amount of time that he does it, and it's just mind blowing. But anyhow. We really want to make this show interactive, so please send your questions. We'll get to as many of them as we can. Todd's going to go over some of his photos and explain what he likes about them and the different angles of photography, but he's also going to choose some of the photos that you guys submitted and go over those as well. And there's a lot of really good ones, so I'm sure it was hard for him to choose. We did mention there's a fundraiser that we're doing for Changing Tides Foundation. We didn't quite get all the pieces put together yet, so what it is we're going to have to do the fundraiser. Todd has a signed print of Greg Long, and for those who donate to the Changing Tides Foundation, that money will go to a project called Where Does It Go?, which is a series focused on environmental injustice directed towards people of color. But what you'll have to do is stay tuned, and we'll post it on our Instagram, and Todd will post it on his Instagram shortly after the show once we get all the nuts and bolts put together. But anyhow, I'm gonna send it over to Todd, and he's gonna talk photography with you.
Hello?
You're on.
I'm on. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you everyone for coming and joining us from, I guess, all over on the internet. I'm super excited to be presenting some of my favorite water photos, but was also totally surprised that at the quality and the amount of images that people submitted as well for me to take a look at. I'm a passionate photographer. It's a passion that was a hobby that's turned into a career, but basically I grew up surfing, and I love taking pictures. And when Troy and my wife Jenna were talking to me about trying to do a workshop, we've always done these really cool like slideshows in the back of Patagonia at some of the different locations, especially the one at Cardiff. We were like, oh, how cool would it be to do something like that this summer? But with the stay at home, we decided to do it on Microsoft Teams. So thank you all for joining us. Also just want to say thank you to Troy and Danielle and the team at Patagonia, and also my wife Jenna for helping really make this happen. I just kind of put a slideshow together and made a big cup of coffee, and I'm just going to kind of talk about photography. So please, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask away. I want this to be all inclusive, and also feel free to ask anything from what's it like, traveling to exposure to gear. I really kind of made this slideshow based around a couple different styles of water photography, which for me personally, and these are all just my experiences, are shooting with a fisheye lens, kind of like a mid-length lens, like a 50 millimeter to maybe 100 millimeter lens, photographing underwater, and then kind of my approach to documenting surfing in the ocean and the water. So with that being said, I can't see my screen. I can only see the photos, so bear with us when you do ask questions. They're going to text them to me so I can see them. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys joining us, and hope you enjoy the show we've made for you guys. So I'm just going to start off with this photo of Greg Long. And I guess to begin, I'll start more on the technical side. This image was made, with a fisheye lens. So I'm in the water, with a digital SLR for this photo, DSLR with a wide angle lens, and my camera's inside of a water housing, which his goal is to give you the full functionality of the camera, but also to keep water out so you can swim in the water. Usually when I'm shooting in the water, things I'm looking for immediately are like the size of the swell, the location that we're at, maybe what size board the surfers are going to be on, so I can kind of base myself either closer to the takeoff spot or further down the line, depending on what I think the wave's going to be doing and what kind of surfing they're going to be doing. So for a wave like this, which is just kind of like an outer reef slab, I tend to be a little bit further away from the peak, so it gives me time to know where the wave is going to form on the reef, and I can always swim into position. With a fisheye lens, you typically want to be like 3 to 5 feet away. However, on this image, I was probably 10 feet away, and because of the lens, it made a big wave look even bigger. And I originally thought I was a little out of position when I shot this photo, but then it ended up being our favorite photo from the shoot. Things to think about with photos compositionally are always like the rule of thirds. I try to keep the subject out of the center as much as possible. When magazines were more prevalent, there was a thing called the gutter, which went right down the center of the magazine. So if you were to shoot for like a 2-page spread, you'd want the subject either on the left side of the frame or the right side of the frame to give yourself the best opportunity to get a 2-page spread. This photo in particular ended up being a cover, like a fold-out cover, so we got lucky on that.
Hey Todd.
Yeah.
Where was that photo taken at?
So I can't say where.
Oh.
one of the things I love about photography is being able to go to places that very few people have been and kind of inspiring others to want to go on their own exploration, go find their own wave. This wave, Greg Long and his brother Rusty had spent a lot of time researching the area and trying to find out when the waves were going to be best. So you're kind of sacrificing what would be maybe a great swell somewhere else to try to find a place new. So as a photographer, it's really like kind of my responsibility to inspire people to want to go on their own adventures, but also not just like draw a roadmap on how to get there.
I got a question from Jesus. He wants to know how you deal with the tides of getting in and out of those breaks around sharp rocks and reefs.
Yeah, so thanks for the question, Jesus. I guess in order to be a good, not a safe surfer or a safe water photographer, you really want to kind of survey the scenario, like survey the scene before you just jump right in. So rather than just showing up to a spot, throwing a wetsuit on, jumping in, I'm always trying to look at entry point and exit points just in case something were to go wrong. And also what may be like the path of least resistance to give you the safest way in, the safest way out. It's kind of a, shooting photos in the water is a series of like calculated risks. So trying to manage the amount of energy you have, maybe the positioning in the lineup you might want to be at, and then also what lens you're choosing to shoot with. If the waves are 20 feet, you may not want to swim inside on a 6-footer knowing that there's going to be a bigger one behind it. So I try to limit the amount of times I'm in a really critical zone to when the guys I'm shooting with are getting the best waves. It's kind of like bow hunting. Some guys go bow hunting and they only go out with a couple arrows. You don't want to shoot every wave. You just want to kind of photograph the ones that count. I'm gonna sneak to the next photo. So I put this image in. This is a photo of Craig Anderson at Chopu. And again, thank you for the questions. This image I wanted to include because I wanted to show what you can do with a wide angle lens when you're really low in the wave. Typically when you're lower in the wave, it makes the wave actually look a little bit smaller because the subject can be closer to the lens and you can't tell how much higher the wave is above his head. This was a pretty big wave, but because he's crouched low and he's so close to me, he's closer to the lens than usual. It's hard to get an idea or a perspective as to the actual size of the wave.
And Todd,
yeah.
Since you're talking about getting close, I have a question for you from one of our viewers. He wants to know, or she wants to know, what your camera setting on a day like this is, the ISO, f-stop, etc. And by the way, thank you for doing this. You're a legend.
Yeah. Please tell her thank you for the question. And like, I love this. I love you kind of like asking away. It makes it more fun for me. Otherwise, I'm literally talking to a screen and I don't know if anyone's listening. So this is really cool for me when the questions are coming up. So thank you. A day like today, so when I first started shooting, I would shoot on film, and the highest ISO film we would shoot on would be like Kodak 100 VS. Maybe if it was cloudy, we would like push it maybe half a stop, otherwise it would become too grainy. Now the digital cameras are so good. On a day like today, this was in Tahiti, it was bright, but it was cloudy, so I would typically have my ISO at ISO 400, and I try to keep my shutter around 1/1600th of a second, so I can really freeze the action, and then let the aperture fall accordingly. So I don't have the metadata in front of me. I'm guessing I was ISO 400, 1/1600th of a second, at about 5.6 to 6.3. That's probably right around where my settings are for 95% of my photos. If the ISO goes too high, I'm typically trying to force it in lighting conditions that aren't very good. And if I go too low, I feel like the grain structure or the pixel structure between ISO 100 and ISO 400 with these new cameras is so minimal. I'd rather give myself the best opportunity to not only freeze the action, but have a little bit more depth of field as well. So this was an example of a low angle. Craig actually ended up running me over on this frame because I'm so used to shooting surfers on a thruster that typically have like 4-inch to 4 1/4 inch fins, but he was on a single fin that was a 9-inch fin. So when I swam under the wave, his single fin was a little bit longer, ended up cracking the port of the housing I was using. So I went over the falls, and then when I came out the back, the housing was starting to leak. So I did like this one-arm swing back to the boat. And fortunately, I did have another water housing with me on the trip. We'd gone to Tahiti for 3 days on this trip. So a lot of the shoots that we do are pretty quick in and out. And I always pack the same amount of gear for 1 or 2 days as I do for a month, just in case something like this happens.
Todd, I got another question from a viewer, which kind of goes with where you're at right now. Is Chad is asking, how scary is Teahupo'o? Did I say that right? When it's firing and you have to get the shot and then think about your exit strategy.
It can be very scary. You know, there's photographers that swim out there with a wide angle lens when it's a lot bigger than me. This day I felt pretty comfortable because it was big, but it wasn't huge. It was also kind of inconsistent. So some of the factors to think about when you're shooting water photos is safety. It's always really important to kind of have an understanding of what the swell is doing, whether it's on an increase or decrease. Typically, if it's increasing, it'll become more and more consistent. And on a south swell, you'll typically have more waves per set than on a west swell. So those are kind of all factors I'm thinking about when I'm jumping off the boat or swimming off land. But yeah, I kind of approach photography the same way I would approach surfing the waves. You want to give yourself the best opportunity to either catch the best wave or surf the best wave or photograph the best wave, but also do it somewhat safely. And you know, if you hit the reef, well, yeah, the guys surfing hit the reef trying to get the shots too, so it's kind of a fair trade in my opinion. I'll move to this next shot. So this is an image of Dane Gudauskas, and this was shot maybe a couple months ago, not too long ago, and this was in San Diego. So one thing that always kind of irks me when I look at photo workshops or when I look at portfolio reviews is you see all these images from these far off places and you go, that's great, but I live in Santa Barbara, I live in San Diego, or wherever you live, you know, we don't have Teahupo'o in our backyard. So I always think it's to me, it's almost more gratifying to shoot an image at home than it is to shoot a photo on the road, because at least where we live in San Diego, it's a lot more rare to get the conditions like this. So this is Dane Gudauskas, who shot in San Diego. This is an example of more of a mid-face shot. So this wave, maybe it's a foot or two overhead, really early morning light. So we're always looking at like the weather forecast to try and find those conditions that have really nice east winds. Like on the West Coast, whenever we have Santa Anas, we typically have the best conditions to shoot early in the morning. And then we're also trying to find a wave that is hollow and is also not too crowded, because if it's super crowded, you're going to start running into maybe the guys that you're shooting with aren't going to be able to get the wave that you want to get. So we'll try and go way down the beach, away from people, even if the waves aren't as good as maybe like one of the more popular breaks. It gives us the most opportunity to make a photo that that we wouldn't normally get to make. If you look closely, one of the things that we learned, I guess in doing this for a while, is Dane's riding a little bit bigger of a board. He's riding probably a 6'3" or a 6'6". We found when the waves are bigger and hollower, rather than using a little bit smaller of a board where you can take off under the lip, which is what a lot of these pro guys like to do, we found by getting a little bit longer of a board, you're able to catch the wave earlier, which minimizes the amount of spray. So as much work as it is for me to be swimming with a fisheye lens and trying to position myself, Dane is doing the same by keeping his hand off the face so there's no spray around him. And he gets in early just to make it look as clean as possible. If you look closely right here, I'm actually kicking up a little bit of water on the way out. It's kind of a no-no in photography, but I left this photo in to kind of show how the more and more you do it, the more subtlety you start noticing within the imagery. But getting to collaborate with guys like Dane and Craig and who everyone else that are in these photos are, that's what makes it so fun, is when you're working with friends that are just as passionate about surfing and making photos as you are. Go ahead.
And yeah, Todd, I got a few questions. I got a lot of questions, but awesome. I'm gonna combine a few of them. A lot of folks are asking what kind of equipment you recommend as starting off as a new water photographer, and then also what kind of exercise you do to stay in shape to swim the whole time and carrying the housing.
Yeah, so again, guys, thank you for the questions. Like, it gets me stoked. The first thing I do, camera equipment wise, I'm shooting with a 1DX Mark II Canon, and I have a variety of their lenses, anything from the 8 to 15 millimeter fisheye all the way up to their 500 millimeter lens. I started with a Canon A2 and a 15 millimeter fisheye, and I've kind of like slowly built my quiver as time's gone on. If you're just getting into photography, I highly recommend starting with either a GoPro or even a Aquatech makes a housing for an iPhone. If you have an iPhone, called Access Go, which is great because you can swim out with your iPhone. You can shoot photos of your friends. You can shoot photos of empty waves. The new phones have really nice cameras, and you're not investing a ton of money into gear. The gear I have, I am typically shooting with kind of like the newest gear, but partially because it is my career and I want to make sure that I give my clients the best opportunity to make the highest resolution photos that we can. But it's a huge investment just to go from not being a photographer to investing in the gear that I have. So you kind of want to start slow and build your way up. How do I stay in shape? I surf a lot. I love to body surf, so I try and spend as much time as I can in the water. My wife is really into road biking, so she got me into road biking, and just trying to keep up with her is enough to try and keep me in shape. So road biking's been a new one for me. She likes to find these steep hills and race me up them and beats me, and then does it again, and I'm just falling apart. So yeah, I don't know. I try to stay active, try to eat really healthy, try to eat as healthy as I can, and I guess I kind of have a lot of energy and drink a lot of coffee, so I'm always trying to do something, whether it be surfing or body surfing or training jiu-jitsu or riding bikes. I can't get into the running thing. It just doesn't work for me. I'm like, yeah, my legs are short and I don't know, it's just tiring and it hurts your knees, and I would rather just just surf. It's funny, I surf a lot without a leash and I'm a pretty below average surfer, so I'm losing my board a lot, so I end up swimming from my board a lot, and I consider that cross training.
Yeah, that's great cross training. I'll try that.
Yeah.
I got a few technical questions we could go over. When you're using a fisheye lens, do you use manual focus?
I do use manual focus. And so when I'm shooting with a fisheye, typically the sweet spot in the lens is right between when the subject's about 3 to 5 feet away. And so what I'll do is before I go in the water, I'll put the lens on the camera and then go up to either a wall, or if it's my car, if we're parked in the lot, and I'll autofocus on maybe my door, and I'll stand about 3 feet away, and then I'll flip it to manual. And then if you use the autofocus button when the lens is on manual, it beeps when it's in focus. And so I'll do like a step forward, and I'm like, okay, if it's beeping at 2 feet, it's sharp. And then if I take a couple steps back and then beeping and it's like 5 or 6 feet away, it's sharp. I'll then take a little piece of black tape and I'll tape the focus down, because sometimes when you're swimming, like in shore break or in bigger surf, your focus can actually slip. So I've seen it where like you start the session in focus and then you go over the falls a couple times and then your photos become more and more out of focus. So I learned by taping the lens, your focus stays the same. And then I've actually right now, like, I don't think I've adjusted the focus on my fisheye lens for like 2 years, because I found the sweet spot and I taped it down and I just haven't adjusted it since. If you do tape it on the bottom so you don't get a reflection on the port of your housing. And that's a really great way to do it. But if you are going to shoot underwater, you will need to, I will typically shoot autofocus for underwater. And I have a different lens that I'll use underwater than above water. The next shot I wanted to show an example of. So this was actually shot on film. This is an example. So I grew up bodyboarding. I grew up taking photos of my friends bodyboarding. This was shot on a Canon A2 on Velvia film. And so you can actually see, I don't know if you can tell on the computer, but there is a slight bit of motion. This is when we were shooting surf photos at like 7/50th of a second at around 4.5. And this is an example of what it looks like to get a high angle shot. So this wave is probably about the same size wave as the wave of Craig Anderson. But because I'm high up in the lip, it makes the wave look so much bigger. And so there's times when guys or girls are on a big tube, and if you're really low, you can't tell how big the wave is. And then if you get high up in the lip, it really expands the size of the tube and can make a big wave look even bigger, or a small wave look really big. And this one I went over the falls on, and this is a shot that actually kept, this was maybe on the second wave of the entire trip. So you kind of never know when that sweet spot is going to happen. But this is one of those images that really kind of like inspired me to continue to want to shoot water images, and I love it. It's just, we were down in Mexico, we went down for a few days, and back then we didn't know whether we got the shot until we came home. But when I got the slide back, I was like, oh, I do really love this, and it's a special feeling when you get a photo back. Surfboard, bodyboard, paddleboard, body surf, it doesn't matter to me. If you're in the water and having fun, I don't really care what you're riding.
Todd, I got another question for you. What's the best method to use the dry port technique for water droplets?
Okay. So I think the question is how to keep water off the lens. And for a dome port, which is typically what you use with a fisheye lens, I'm kind of just giving away all the secrets right here, but it doesn't really matter. If this inspires at least a couple people to want to go shoot images, like, it gets me stoked. But for a dome port, what I'll do is right before I get on land, or right before I go in the water on land, I'll like I'll use the saliva, or basically spit or lick on the port, and I'll dunk it in the water. And that's a great way to make sure your housing's not leaking, and also to build a slight film around the front end of the port. And then when I'm in the water, maybe every like 15 minutes or so, I'll spit and lick on the port again. And that creates a thin film, which helps the water bead off the front, like fall off the front. Or if I know there's a big set coming, I'll do that again and again just to make sure that there's no water drops on the port. And then when we start talking about long lens images, or like that are shot with a flat port, I can go into details of how to keep the water off there. But basically what I'll do is I'll make sure my hands are clean. So if you put sunblock on your face, I'll wipe my hands with a towel before I go in the water, and then use the oil from your hand, or maybe from like behind your ear, and rub it on the front. And that way, when you pull the housing out of the water, the little bit of oil will then help the water fall off the front of the port. Some people have used this, like, though I've heard different theories of like rubbing a potato on the front, or using like this, I don't know, some sort of liquid solution that goes on the front of the plexi. My theory is that, like, you know, worst case scenario, you're somewhere and you're so used to rubbing a potato on your port, or this liquid solution, I forget what it's called, and you know, you don't have it, then all of a sudden you're limited. You don't really know what to do. So I just figured by using the oil off your hands, it's always worked for me. Another method is some people do swim with a little squeegee, and that helps the water come off the front. I haven't done it, but some people says it works really well.
I got another question that goes along with this is when you're shooting wide on bigger days, are you looking through the viewfinder when shooting, or holding the camera out while you're starting to duck dive in?
No, so I'm typically using my housing has a pistol grip, which is a small like pole at the bottom of the housing, and I can get it if you guys stay there real quick. Sorry about that. I should have thought about that first. So this is the housing that I'm currently using. It's called a Aquatech Evo. I don't know if you guys can see it okay, but this is the pistol grip. This is for a 70 to 200 millimeter. I shot with this yesterday, so this is the lens that I have that I shot last with. But this is the pistol grip that I was referring to, and then this is it has a 2-stage shutter. So if you are using autofocus, you push it halfway down to focus, and then push it all the way down to shoot. Typically, when I'm swimming, especially with a fisheye, I'll hold the housing like this, and I'll use my back thumb and use that as a stable piece. So if I'm swimming, I can hold this and swim into the wave, and that helps me not only keep the horizon straight, but it alleviates some of the weight off of just holding it like this. I'm gonna close these clasps just so you can see. I like this housing because it's super easy. You do 4 clasps and it's totally sealed, and it has all the functions. But let me see this. Sorry about that. Yeah, and it's got like this interlocking so they don't come undone. But typically I'll just swim like this, and then I will swim kind of with my back to the wave, and then as you start getting sucked up the face, you'll do like a little water polo kick, and that gives you the extra extension to get a little bit of an elevated look. So even if you're short, like myself, you can still make it look like you're tall swimming. Did that answer the question? Okay, I can't see any of the comments, so I'm kind of like just.
Yeah, I think you nailed it for him.
Cool. So I included this next shot, and this is Ryan Birch. This is in San Diego, down the street. And again, I tried to make some images from I live in San Diego in Solana Beach, down the street from the Cardiff store. And I do most of my photography in San Diego just out of Cardiff because it's close to home, and we've got great waves. The light's typically nice, and this is where a lot of my friends live. So if I'm not traveling, I love to shoot photos at home. Typically, like a fisheye is like the worst lens to shoot for longboarding because it makes the board look like a banana. It distorts everything. but sometimes you get lucky. And this photo was the first photo I shot of longboarding with a fisheye that kind of made me think, oh, you could, with a bit of time and patience and a collaboration with a subject, you can make something kind of unique and refreshing. So this is one of those kind of like, sometimes you just get lucky photos, and this is that one. The next image is of Joel Tudor out at Cardiff Reef. And for this image, you can tell it's more of like a waist level shot. And you could either get this effect by shooting with a pole cam, or what I did is he was riding a 10-foot board, so I rode a 12-foot board behind him. And as the wave got steep, I went around him and he got on the nose, and I actually ended up going in front of him. And then he nose rode behind me. But this image is the one that really stuck out to me as the most. And I guess one thing you'll kind of notice with my work is that most of the photos are either shot during the first hour of light or the last hour of light. And that's something that's a bit of advice that was given to me early on. And it's also one of the pieces of advice that I always like to give to others is, people ask like, how do you make your photos better? It's like shoot better light. I feel like one of the strengths that I have with photography is being able to communicate with my subjects and having an idea and saying, I know Joel Tudor is one of the best nose riders in the world, but how can we make a photo that's different? Well, let's shoot in beautiful light. And so sometimes you end up waiting, a week, a month, a couple of months for the right conditions. But when the conditions are right, that's when you kind of have to be on your game and make the best work. So sometimes you do have to go out and practice on the cloudy days. And so the next time you go to shoot when the light's really good, you kind of like, every time you bring a camera out, you learn something about yourself, about the process. Another thing that I was going to touch on is if you are shooting super early in the morning, wear a wetsuit that's warmer than you think you need, because you always get cold. So even though I live in San Diego and we're shooting in the wintertime, the water gets cold and not that cold, I'll wear a 5 or a 6 mil with a hood. I'd so much rather be warm than be out in the water shivering, because there's nothing worse than being really cold and then the wave of the day comes and you can't even focus on the subject or the wave or anything like that. So I would always err on the side of extra warmth, even in like tropical conditions.
And Todd, since we were talking about lighting too, I have a question from EO. How often are you swimming with a flash, and how often do you use post-processing?
Thank you for the question. I used to shoot with a flash a lot more. When I switched to digital, I didn't upgrade my housing to shoot with a flash, and I found when there was always that fine line between shooting pre-dawn, like swimming out in the dark, shooting with a flash, but then there's that moment where it's too bright for a flash. So you can't be shooting with the flash because the shutter, their max sync is at 200th of a second. I was going in and switching housings, and I was like kind of missing the golden light. So I haven't shot with a flash in the water in probably a year or so. But when I do, I'm still shooting them on film. So I've kind of slowed down on that. But there was a phase where I did it a lot, and there were so many times you'd like swim out in the dark, and you think the waves are good, and you get out there and the waves aren't good, or I don't know. It was a lot of work to get a photo, but when you do get it, it's pretty special. I've shot a few photos I really like with them, but I don't do it as much as I used to. And then post-production, all my images, I guess they all go through some sort of post-production. Typically, after I shoot, I'll put them into a card reader, load the images directly onto an external hard drive, back them up, and then I'll change the file name, add the metadata, and then as far as post-processing, it's just color, contrast, and then a little bit of cropping. But I really try not to do anything in post that you can't do in a dark room. I feel like if you're spending more than 2 minutes in post, the photo might not be that great. I just try and keep it simple. I'm not very tech savvy at all, so the less work I do in post, the better. So I spend more time trying to find good light and finding the right location with the right waves and communicating with the subject than I do in post. It's just, yeah, I feel like too much post work, and the image isn't there.
And before we leave this photo, I have a question from a viewer. They want to know what lens that you used when you took this shot of Joel.
Oh, so this image was shot with a Canon 8 to 15 millimeter lens. Actually, just to go back, all these photos are all shot with the Canon 8 to 15 millimeter, except for this lens, which was shot with a 15 millimeter fisheye, and this was before the 8 to 15 came out. So I kind of broke the workshop into different lenses, different focal lengths. So this is kind of like the fisheye section. I chose this because this was the lens that I started shooting with. This is the next section. This is more of like a long lens approach. So this image was shot with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens. This is Dan Malloy out at Rincon in the morning time. And so that was shot with a setup very similar to this, but with a Canon 1V camera, a film camera. That camera used to shoot 10 frames a second on film. So you would actually, you know, if you were to hold the shutter, you'd have about 3.5 seconds of shooting, and then you'd have to swim in, change the film, dry your hands, take your wetsuit off, swap out film, and go back out. Getting to work with guys like Dan is always special because they're so good at surfing, and they're great photographers too, so they understand light. And you also notice with the long lens that the background appears a lot closer because of the compression. So with a long lens, I'll typically try and up the shutter speed a little bit more to compensate for me moving, the subject moving fast, and the camera shake from a longer lens. So for this, I'm typically shooting, I'm able to zoom in and out while they're surfing. And then when the moment happens, I shoot. Which kind of brings me to another point. When I am shooting, with a fisheye, I'm shooting on manual focus, and then when I'm shooting in the water with a long lens, I'll shoot with the dry port. So I'll just use my hand and I'll rub it like this, and then when I pull the camera out of the housing, I'll shake the housing, and that has the water come off. But then I'll also shoot on autofocus and on AI servo, so that way you're focusing in between each frame. That's kind of a nice trick. When the subject's coming at you, the camera's focusing in between each frame. It gives you a better opportunity to have more in-focus photos.
And Todd, I got a few questions that the attendees are asking about the client. How do you deal with the relationships between clients, brands, and athletes? There's a few folks asked about this one.
Well, I guess the question is, how do I work with the client, the athlete, and can you please repeat it?
Oh, sorry. Let me go back to that. Basically, there's a few of them that are asking just like, how do you deal with the clients and the brands and the athletes, the business aspect and relationship aspect of what you do?
That's a really good question. That's a challenge of working in the creative space and working in the arts when at the same time you're trying to do it for a living as well. So I guess with the subject, with the surfers, I grew up photographing my friends, and a lot of them were either great surfers or turned into good surfers, or through them I was able to work with guys that were professional surfers. For me, it's always been about just making great images, and that's kind of the first and foremost. I want to have good relationships with my friends, with the guys in the photos, but also just with people in general. So I'm always just kind of upfront and honest about what I feel like is fair and what goes into the images. When you make an image and present it to a company, and suppose they want to, there's kind of, in our industry, there's two ways of shooting. One way is to shoot on spec, which is you call someone, hey, the waves are going to be good tomorrow. Let's go try and make some photos together. And then you shoot them, and they go, oh, these came out so cool. My sponsor wants to use them. Then you reach out to the sponsor, and you typically go, here's my rates for Instagram, for web, for a 2-page spread in a magazine, and you kind of have this rate sheet that varies dependent upon the usage. And also, if it's, let's say it's like social media based, if a company has 1 million followers, the rate's going to be a little bit different than a company that has like 30,000 followers. But I just try and be transparent about it. Sometimes it gets awkward and uncomfortable, and maybe that's just me because I suck at business and have a little bit of help with that side. But I just try to be open and honest and transparent about what I feel like my images are worth and what the companies feel like they're worth, and we just try to come to a fair agreement with them. But I try not to let that side interfere with the making of the images, because it's a lot harder to make a good image than it is to sell an image. And even if a company wants to license a photo and the rate's not fair, and you say no, you do have to hold yourself with a little bit of integrity in terms of how low you're willing to go on the rates. The other approach to making work is if a company were to reach out and say, we have this new board short, we have this new surfboard, we'd love to make images with you, and then you guys work upon a rate based on the usage. So a company might say, we would like you to go to, I don't know, Santa Barbara for a couple of days and go shoot our team. And then in that situation, I would like break down how many images they need, how many images I think we can make on a shoot like that, and what the value of that is. So you kind of add up all the different values of how they intend to use it, maybe give a little bit of like a package break, and then you send them an estimate, and they can either agree or disagree or kind of negotiate back and forth. It gets tricky when you're like, especially in the surf industry, because the budgets seem to be getting a lot smaller, and the emphasis on social media is higher and higher, yet it's still kind of like the stepchild of commercial advertising. So a lot of brands want this like grandiose photo shoot, but they're like, it's only for social. But then you're like, well, your social media has 2 million followers, and you guys are actually speaking to a lot more people than you would, let's say, if it was through a magazine. So trying to manage everyone's expectations, but also being paid fairly is a challenge, especially as a surf photographer. Like, I don't think anyone ever really got into surf photography to make a lot of money, but you do become, not to sound cliche, but rich in lifestyle. I've been very fortunate to travel the world quite a bit, and also have learned to grow to run a business successfully. But it's hard, and it hasn't been without like a lot of learning mistakes too. I'll move on to the next image, and if that doesn't answer the question, please like ask away. This image is with a long lens, and it's actually a pretty similar motion to the one at Damalloy. This is Derek Disney. Some of my favorite time to shoot, like I said, is the first hour of light and the last hour of light. And when the sun starts going down, you can play around with a slower shutter speed. And even if it's not super sharp, there are parts of this image that are very sharp. And I love the look of a speed blur, because it kind of gives that sense of speed and motion, and the colors kind of tend to saturate quite a bit. And this is Derek Disney on the twin fin. So yeah, using a long lens, you can be further away and be in the safety of the channel, or you can get real close and have them fill the full frame. Most of these images that you're seeing are not have not been cropped, so this is as they were shot in camera.
And Todd, I know we haven't gone over any black and whites yet, but someone is asking, what factors do you consider when deciding whether to do black and white or color?
It really just has to. It really just has to do with the color of the light, and also maybe the color of the water. If the color of the water isn't very pretty, I'll make it black and white and make it have more of a sense of shape. I feel like color images are very warm tones, they can be they can swing you emotionally one way, whereas black and whites are a lot more kind of harsh, and it's more about the shape and the design of the image. This photo of Taylor Knox was shot in Oceanside, and it was a small day, and rather than trying to crouch in with a wide angle lens, I thought we'd play around with a 50mm lens. And this one I just happened to be stuck inside, but the water was so clear you could see him through the lens. And this was probably shot at like a 2,000th of a shutter speed. So you can really, like, the action's frozen really tight. And I don't know if it shows up, but there is a little bit of a rainbow kind of popping out. So sometimes you just get lucky when there's the right combination of surfer and light. And again, you don't have to be flying all over the world to make nice images. It's more about just picking the right day.
I got another one for you. I'm real interested on this one because it happens to me all the time. What do you do about foot and calf cramping when swimming for hours and hours?
That's a really good question.
Lots of coffee and water.
More water than coffee. If I know the waves are going to be really good, I try to limit the coffee in the morning to like half a cup, and then drink a ton of water. And then as soon as you get out of the water, more water, and then coffee. But yeah, usually like before a big session, I'll eat maybe like some oatmeal and a banana, maybe some peanut butter, and just drink a lot of water. Try and stay hydrated. That's the biggest thing, is when you lose hydration, you're going to cramp up pretty quick. So you want to, you want to try and, if you know the waves are going to be good tomorrow, start drinking a lot of water today. Maybe even add a little salt to the water so it sits in your system. I know it's common after a big session. A lot of people want to go in and have a beer or two to celebrate, and they forget about the water. And then the next day they're just cramping the whole time. So try to drink as much water as possible.
And I got two questions about losing. Have you ever gone over the falls, and have you ever lost your equipment in the waves?
I have. I've done both. I've gone over the falls while losing my equipment, and I've lost my equipment getting stuck inside when my leash broke. And then typically, on a good day of shooting, especially with a wide angle, you're going over the falls a bit. But you don't want to interfere with the surfer. You want to get as close to the surfer as you can without getting in their way, but also, depending on the size of the wave, if you're a pipeline, going over the falls can be pretty dangerous. So you try and limit those ones up, like at a pipeline, but going over the falls is just kind of part of it. You kind of, they say like you can't catch the wave of your life without hitting the reef a few times. You can't really like take the best photo of your life without hitting the reef a few times too. So that's just kind of part of it. It's kind of fun, I guess, in a sick and weird way. This photo of Nathan Fletcher was shot during the Code Red swell, and this was shot with a 7200. And this was an example where I couldn't get on a boat, and so I borrowed a friend's surfboard, Dave Rosovich's surfboard, and paddled out from the harbor. And this day was kind of crazy. There was like refrigerators floating by, and the waves were huge. And this is Nathan Fletcher's famous wave. And at the time, I was the only one in the water shooting because I couldn't get on a boat. And it was really scary, and there were a lot of boats and propellers around. So but you'll notice I tried to pull back a little bit. I didn't want to shoot it super tight because, we kind of have a saying with water photography, like the prettier the wave, the more you want to pull back, because it gives a whole sense of the feeling of the place. And you can see these clouds up here. And I feel like if the image was really tight, you'd be missing out on the larger picture of the wave. But a lot of photography, especially surf photography, is being there and trying to kind of capture that decisive moment. And sometimes that moment happens in the first or second wave, like that photo of Spencer Skipper. And other times you're out there for 8 hours until the moment happens. But it's a bit of an endurance race, but it's also a bit of a patience game too. This is an example when I chose to use the image in black and white. The watercolor here wasn't very pretty. And even though it was beautiful morning, warm light, by making it black and white, it hides the color of the water, but it still shows the shape. So photography is all about just capturing light, and light creates shadow, which creates shape. This is Kelly Slater. This is the image that was shown to represent his 10th world title, and he looks like a statue standing in the tube here. This is one of the images that kind of kickstarted my career and my relationship working with Kelly, and I feel very fortunate for it. I was nervous because I was still relatively new to photography, and I was swimming really far out to sea with a big, heavy camera. And I knew when we got this image and we got back to the hotel, and I looked at the photo, it was sharp. I kind of knew we had something special there. So this was shot with a 7200 2.8 lens at probably a 12/50th of a second at like 5.6. So I do try to get a little bit more of a greater depth of field than some. Some people like to shoot real wide open, like 2.8 or f2 if they're using like the 50 too. But I think that's a cool look. But for me, I'd rather just make sure it's sharp.
And Todd, I got a question from Hannah. Can you talk about busy lineups with a lot of photographers in the water? And is there any photography etiquette rules like there are in surfing?
Yeah, that's a great question, Hannah. Especially in places where you're not from or not familiar with, there's definitely a bit of like just like surfers, there's kind of a mutual respect with a little bit of a hierarchy in the lineup of waves. It's the same with photographers. In some places like Hawaii, for example, you swim out at Pipeline, there's a group of photographers that dedicate their whole lives and their careers to shooting out there, and they deserve to be in the front, and then you kind of just start in the back and start with the longer lens, and as you feel more comfortable and as you've your presence has been made in the lineup a little bit more, you can slowly kind of work your way in. But I always tend to err on the side of caution and hang further back, and usually I'm kind of bringing my own guys to the lineup, so we're all in it, kind of working together. But yeah, I always say, if you're going to go shoot photos, kind of bring a couple friends, go to a place that's not so crowded, doesn't have to necessarily be the best waves, and work with your friends to make a photo. Go through the magazines, go through websites, and see photos you like and put them on your wall or screenshot them, and go maybe try to recreate them, but with your own twist on them. But yeah, at a place like Off the Wall, for example, there'll be 20 water photographers all shooting with a fisheye, and so you kind of want to give yourself space to get a photo, but also respect the people that have been out there for a lot longer and that are working with certain athletes. So there's guys like, I remember being out at like Chopu, for example, where there'd be me and a couple friends. We'd all be out in the water shooting photos, and I'll never forget. I was at we were at Chopu one afternoon. It was myself and Pat Stacy, and he was shooting for Billabong, and I was shooting for Quicksilver, and I think it was Shane Dorian took off on a big wave, and I was in front of him on accident. So I just swam under, and then he got the shot of Shane, and then the next wave was Kelly, and he was next to it. So he ended up swimming under, and then I got the shot of Kelly, and we were both able to get images of the guys that we were out there shooting, and we weren't in each other's way, because there's nothing worse than having a big head popping out in front of you when you're trying to make an image of your friend, and it impacts the surfers too. This image of Ryan Birch out at Cloudbreak, it was shot with a fixed 135 millimeter lens. So you can either shoot with like a zoom lens, like a 7200 or 50 millimeter or an 85 millimeter. But this one, I was thinking about Larry Moore, Flame, a lot, and he loved the 135. So I realized that the 135 lens fit inside of the same port as a 16-35. So when you're traveling, the less gear you can bring, the better, but you always kind of want to have a backup. So I was trying to have one port fit multiple lenses. And so this was the first or second time I shot with a 135. And it was tricky because if it got too close, I would end up missing the shot. But I love the compression and the natural feel of a little bit longer of a lens. It's a bit of a classic look. This photo, it reminds me of this photo of, there were a lot of you guys submitted images. There's an image that Shane Gray shot at Pipeline with a 105 that I was going to talk about in a little bit. And yeah, I love the look of a longer lens. And it's a little bit safer too if you're at a really long spread out lineup. Another nice thing with a 135 is you can capture these kind of like candid lifestyle moments in the water. We were down in Chile, and Craig Anderson popped out the back and sat up, and the sun was blaring, and he put his hands up. I turned around and shot one frame of this, and I just love the light on his face. So when you're shooting in the water, there's You can shoot the waves, you can shoot surfers, but you can also shoot surf action, but you can also just shoot these like kind of candid lifestyle moments. And with a longer lens, sometimes they don't even know that you're shooting.
Todd, I got another question from Michelle. She's asking if you have any techniques for swimming while holding a housing.
Yeah. So I'm glad I have the housing here. One thing I do is when I'm swimming, I see a lot of people swimming and they'll hold the housing like this and they're kind of pushing it forward, but you're pushing all the surface area. So a lot of the times I'll flip it upside down. That way you're only swimming with this much surface area. And I'll kind of hold it in front of me and use my arm as a blade and kind of rest this on the water. And then I'll use my left arm to kind of propel me through the water. As far as swim fins go, I like using the fins. I think they're the most comfortable fins. I think there are fins out there that are maybe a little bit more powerful, but as far as comfort, there's nothing worse than cramping or getting blisters on your feet when you're swimming for a bunch of hours. So I found the fin to be the most, the softest foot pocket, but also give me plenty of power to move through a lineup. Yeah, thank you for the question, Michelle. And this is another example of just having a longer lens. This is Christelle Morrow. And yeah, you get a little bit closer. You can see the depth of field falls off, even if you're shooting at like 5.6. If you put your subject a little bit closer to the frame, the background will fall out of focus. And yeah, it's also fun. Like shooting in the water, it's supposed to be a collaborative effort, just like going surfing with your friends. So if they get a good wave and you're like, that was rad, we got the shot, or I totally blew it, it's out of focus, but we're still having fun, you get a good laugh and you snap another frame and then you learn. I used to kind of like, I mean, it's frustrating when you shoot a photo or, you know, there's a good wave that comes in and you miss it and whatever, there's water on the lens or you miss the focus or you're out of position, but there's always going to be another wave. And I think it's just like with surfing, sometimes you take off on the wave of the day and you fall. Well, it's a bummer, but you got to try and catch another wave. And I feel like photography is very similar to that.
And Todd, Jesus has another question. What's the communication with your subjects before and during the shoot?
So that's a really good question. And again, photography it's so collaborative. So like I'll take this image, for example, of Greg Long. Greg called and he's like, the waves are going to be really good. I want to go on a camping trip. And I'm like, I'd love to. And first thing I ask a guy like Greg is, what size boards are you bringing? Because if he says the waves are going to be big, it's like, are we going to Cortez Bank or are we going to a beach break? Like you kind of never really know with a guy like Greg. So I'll typically use my experience that I've learned from surfing and the boards that I have to try to understand how big the waves are going to be. So then I can kind of adjust accordingly in the lineup. This day, Greg said he was going to ride a 6'7" board. So I knew the waves were going to be big, but not huge. And I tried to give myself a little bit more space, more so towards the shoulder, because understanding your subject, Greg is the kind of guy, for example, that he doesn't go catch 20 waves in a session. He'll catch 2 or 3, but they're typically like the biggest waves. And for photos, you only want to shoot the best waves, the cleanest waves. So rather than swimming in and shooting every wave, I just waited for the waves that I knew that he was going to try to catch. So I sat off the back like he would. I think I maybe shot 6 waves this entire session. I swam for like 8 hours. But I just tried to wait to photograph the waves that I knew were going to be kind of like in the line of sight with the lens that I had, with the surfers that I was shooting. So we'll typically start with it'll start the day before. Okay, there's a swell coming. Where do we think the waves are going to be good? What size board are you going to ride? Usually the big question is, do you swim a wide angle or do you shoot a longer lens? Because there's so many times you shoot with a wide angle, and if the wave's 100 yards long, you're subjected to a pretty short part of the wave. Whereas with a longer lens, you can capture more of the wave, but the images might not be as dynamic. So you're always kind of balancing that fine line between lens choice and size of wave and maybe how consistent the wave is. So if you're at a beach break that's all over the place, sometimes it's easier to swim with a wide angle and just, always be 10 feet inside of the subject. If you're at a point break, you could sit back either on a bodyboard or a raft or just swim and kind of zoom in and out with a longer lens if they're going to be coming down the line at you. So that's,
Todd,
yeah.
Gabby's got a good question for you. Any tips for improving your positioning and staying out of the way as you gain experience swimming in a crowded lineup?
Yeah, the best advice I would give would just be to go do it and practice. And I think it's really important to swim out into a lineup without a camera, just to familiarize yourself with the spot, with your swimming abilities. Go over the falls a couple times so you kind of get that taboo out of your head. And then, yeah, I don't think you can take images in the water. I don't think you can make images in the water very comfortably if you're not comfortable in the water. So the more time you spend in the water, the more comfortable and second nature it will be, the better your images will be, because you're no longer fighting the little nuances that make you feel uncomfortable in the water, which is going to distract you from making the best images. So I think it's really important, and this is something I learned later in my photo career, is not to always have a camera out and just go body surf or go surfing, and just become familiar with the ocean, and then it'll become a lot more second nature. So this is an example. This was actually shot in a wave pool, which does give you more opportunity to make images, but this was on a commercial set. This is Stephanie Gilmore and water cinematographer Dan Crawford. I included this image because I really wanted to show you what it's like this is what it's like to shoot with a long lens from my perspective, but Darren right here is shooting with a wide angle. So sometimes you're 3 feet away and other times you're 20 feet away. On this shoot in particular, this was a commercial shoot. Darren and I were constantly communicating as to who's going to be in front of each other, or are we side by side. And for this shot, the director requested a wide angle shot. So rather than he and I battle each other, I just said, oh, I'll use a long lens and I'll stay out of the way. And then there were other moments where I was in front and he was down the line with the long lens. And the more, I guess, you start working with other photographers and cinematographers, you just want to be able to work together as a team to make the best images.
Todd, we're a little past the hour now. Should we start going over the photos that people submitted?
Yeah, not a problem. I was going to show some underwater images, but let's do some of the user submitted photos. So these are, this is that Shane Grace image that I was referring to. So this was shot with like I think it's shot with 105 millimeter. I think he's a Nikon guy. And what's really interesting, and I love this photo, I'm so glad you tagged me in it. And for those of you that don't know Shane Grace, you should definitely check out his work. But things to think about is he's basically in the barrel with Taichi Wakita, who's on the wave. And he's not only focusing on the wave, but just to the right is a pretty big wall of water that he's having to balance. I don't know if you can tell in the frame, but it's pin sharp. He is very centered in the frame, but I think for this image it works because the focus is right in the center of the wave, the center of the pit. The surfer's behind the foam ball, and it's just beautifully lit. I love this full frame. I feel like a lot of guys are shooting more with like a 50 millimeter nowadays, which gives you room to crop, and it also gives a lot more kind of negative space. Even if he was in the exact same spot, I feel like guys like Zach Noyle are doing a really good job of shooting with a 50 millimeter where you would shoot like a fisheye. But those guys put themselves in the heaviest situations. I do love the look of a slightly longer lens. So this image really stuck out to me as one of the photos that got tagged, as did this image of Skavik photo. I'm not too sure. I'm not too familiar with his work, but he tagged me in it, and I thought this was a great example of using a slower shutter to shoot empty waves. So when you shoot these images, it's you get a lot of out of focus ones, and then there's one that's really sharp. And this image really stood out to me as an image that it's just beautiful use of light, and something to think about that I'm sure Skavik has been through, which any water photographer has been through, is, even with the slideshow that I put together, I'm showing my best work. There's been countless days where I've swam out in the dark, swam for 5 hours, come in and got no photos. that's something to kind of keep in mind, to kind of keep yourself from getting discouraged, is we want to always show our best imagery, and sometimes all of the elements align, the waves are good, the light's good, and you just can't pull it together, or you're just in the wrong spot. So when you do see an image like this, it makes it that much more special. This image was like a painting. I thought it was really, really pretty.
Todd, I got a question from Wes. Do you prefer shooting with continuous shot or single shot mode? And does it change based on the lens that you're using?
I'm pretty much always shooting with continuous mode. When I was shooting on film, I would shoot one shot at times, but now with the digital image, or with the digital cameras and the big cards, I'd err on shooting a little bit more than shooting less. You can always delete, but you can never add images if you can't shoot it. But I try to shoot enough to capture the moment without just like filling up my CF cards. That was a good question. Thank you. And then this was another image that I thought was really cool. This photo has a really funny story because Sammy and I were shooting photos together. Sammy Olsen, we were roommates in Santa Barbara together, and we were so excited to shoot this day that we were loading up our housings together. So we would go, when we first started shooting together, we'd go shoot photos together. It's like full buddy system. Even if we didn't have surfers, we'd just be like, hey, want to go shoot empty waves? And it's great because you can practice your positioning. You can tune into like locations that you might not otherwise shoot. And you could just practice shooting empty waves. Like if you can shoot an empty wave well, you can shoot a surfer well. But if sometimes it doesn't always work the other way around. So we would just go and drive down to Ventura or go down in front of our house in Santa Barbara and just go shoot as much as we could. But this day, Sammy and I were so excited, we were loading up our cameras in the dark, and he actually loaded black and white film instead of color film. And so this image was an absolutely gorgeous morning, and it's shot on black and white film, which is funny, but the tones are gorgeous.
Hey, Todd, I got a question from Chad. When shooting for a client, do they give you specifics with the shot when it comes to the waves, or do they, for the most part, just do what you're feeling?
It depends. So a lot of the times with a client, let's say we're doing a shoot for Patagonia, and they have a new pair of board shorts. So the first thing that we do is we start communicating with each other. Okay, like, are we after lifestyle images? Are we after action images? If so, we need to think of a place where the water is going to be warm, where they can wear board shorts. So the first thing we think about is, what product are we shooting? Who are we shooting? And then where are we going to shoot it? And then that we just have this open conversation, this open discussion about what it is that we're trying to shoot. So here's a couple underwater images. Shooting underwater is my favorite. This is Rob Machado at sunrise. And again, it just comes down to like collaboration of working with the subject, the light, and the location. This was John Florence and Kelly Slater, shot for our project called Proximity. And really, it's communicating with our subjects, trying to get an idea as to what type of images are going to look best. It's to make these underwater images. It's hard to do in San Diego, but we really got to have these at clear waters. This is at the same spot. And so these were all done with a 14mm lens. Let me show a couple more. This was a commercial shoot that we shot for Nixon. This is Connor Coffin. And the idea was to shoot the watch. So we actually started above water with portraits of him paddling and sitting and looking at the watch. And then the creative director, Terry Snyder, said, okay, what would you do if you were in charge? I was like, man, we're in Tahiti. I would shoot underwater. And this was the first shot we did underwater. And this was the image that ended up being kind of the campaign image. So anytime I'm working with a client, I'm constantly collaborating with their team and the subject and myself to give us the broadest range of the broadest scope of work to come back with the best story. And we can always edit later on.
Hey, Todd,
Yeah.
We're starting to run out of time, but I know you want to answer some of these questions.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think we just roll through a few of them real quick?
Let's do it.
Who is your favorite non-surf photographer?
My favorite non-surf photographer is is Anton Corbin. He's probably Anton Corbin, followed by Danny Clinch, are probably my two favorite photographers of all time. I think they're incredible, and they've got such a unique perspective on photography and also their approach to it. Those whose work I aspire to the most, which is funny because neither of them shoot in the water.
And and when you're traveling, how do you pack your camera gear? Do you carry it on or check it in?
I try and carry as much gear as I can on, and I try and carry my gear in bags that are non-discreet. So I try not to have these big camera bags that look like camera bags, especially when you're traveling to foreign countries. The last thing you want to do is stand out with, hey, look at all this expensive gear we have. So one of the bags I use is a bag made by Ruka called, it's actually the Zach Noyle bag, which is a great bag. Another one is Patagonia makes this black hole bag, which is this great like wet dry bag. And there's a company called F-Stop that makes camera inserts, and I'll put the camera insert inside of my Patagonia bag. And that way it looks like you're just going backpacking, but you have all your camera gear inside. And then I'll use a small Pelican case roller for a lot of the other gear. It depends. If you're going to a place that's like where you're dealing with a lot of water, or you're going to be on boats, you're definitely going to want a Pelican case. If you're going to more of a land-based location, backpacks work great and they're a lot lighter to travel with. But I always try and carry on as much gear as I can. Or I'll even, if I'm traveling with friends, I'll spread the gear out a little bit. If you're going through like a customs area and don't have a carnet. This is just an idea of an underwater portrait you can do. We were shooting a free diving campaign for Yeti. Yeah, I just love shooting underwater. That's like my favorite way to shoot. This is Kelly underwater. Was there another question, Troy?
Yeah, well, there's a bunch, so we can keep. Antonio from Portugal is asking, who's the funniest surfer you shoot with?
The funniest surfer I shoot with? I don't know. They're all pretty quirky in their own ways. Who's the funniest? Benji Weatherly. But I've done a couple trips with Benji. He's pretty funny. Greg Long, he's that dry humor. He's very quiet, and then he gets in traffic and just freaks out. Mark Healy is like one of the funnier dudes, but he's also very serious. Kelly is actually pretty quirky in his own right, because he's more of a night guy and I'm a morning guy. So like I'll be up super early in the morning and he'll be sleeping, and then at like 2 a.m. he'll like wake me up, be like, I got this idea. What do you think? And I'm like, I'm sleeping. What? I don't know. Everyone's got their own quirks. I try to just travel with people that I get along with more so than are great surfers, but if they're great at surfing and quirky, that it's kind of the best of both worlds. But yeah, I don't know. We just try to have, if you're having fun, you're usually making good photos. So I try to have fun. There's nothing worse than like being on a boat or being in this great location and being there with someone you don't really like. It makes it a great trip go south pretty fast.
Cool. Stuart is asking, what do you think is the best way to get your photos seen or put out there for magazines and people?
Well, for magazines, it's changed. Like Surfer Magazine is only 4 issues a year now. Surfer's Journal is 6 issues a year. But I think the best way to get your photos out there is to reach out to the magazines that you aspire to want to be in, and start maybe put together a portfolio of 5 or 10 of your best images, introduce yourself to them, and then start building a relationship with the photo editors. Another way is through Instagram. I know a lot of photographers have been super successful through Instagram. I can barely turn my phone on, so Instagram's not really like my strong suit, but there's been a lot of success with people with Instagram. But I think it's better to have the work go through an editor, because you can kind of like build it. You're showing your work to experts, so you're getting kind of expert feedback as well. Here's an empty wave. Yeah, I'll just go through the photos as the questions come along.
There's another one about underwater exposure. Wes is asking if you have any tips for making sure to get a good exposure underwater.
Yeah, I'll typically use the same exposure. I'll meter the exposure for above water, and then depending on the color of the bottom, if it's a sand bottom, like a light sand bottom, like in Hawaii, I'll typically underexpose by about half a stop. Or if it's a darker bottom, like in Tahiti, where it's a darker reef, I'll typically overexpose based on the outside metering by about half a stop. So if you're shooting, let's say you're above water at 1600th of a second at 5.6, you go underwater, I'll be like 1600 at like f5. If it's a darker bottom, or if it's a lighter bottom, I'll go to like 6.3 or 7.1.
And I got two questions all combined together. Do you wear goggles when you're doing your underwater shots? And also, how do you stay underwater? Nick finds it hard staying under without floating back up.
Yeah. When I'm underwater, I'm always wearing goggles. That way you're able to see the subject as they're taking off. And really the trick is you wanna hold your breath and go underwater as the surfer's taking off, because that way you're minimizing the amount of splashing as they're coming by you, and you're hoping that the surfer is going to pass through your field of lens, or your I guess your range. And as far as floating up, some people do use like a 1 pound weight on a weight belt, but I just figure you're already swimming with enough weight as it is. By adding weight is just extra work while you're treading water. So use your legs as kind of a way to keep yourself underwater. That's kind of the best way to do it. But if you're wearing a thicker suit, like in a really cold water place, you'll float to the surface quicker. So you might want to consider like a 1 pound or a 3 pound weight belt.
And Abe is asking, who are some of your photographers that you give props to, or you try to mimic their style?
As far as surf photographers go, the guys whom I'm always kind of inspired by are I think Ted Grambeau is phenomenal. I think he's a great storyteller. I think Grant Ellis is great. You know, you can't beat the consistency of a photographer like Tom Survey, who's been doing it for so long and is just a workhorse. There's other guys, like if you're going strictly wide angle, there's guys like Daniel Russo and Zach Noyle and Brent Bielman and Scott Eichner that are just, they're crazy. They'll swim under anything with a wide angle lens and come back with these incredible images. But I'm really drawn to kind of the photographers that have a little bit more of a that can tell a well-rounded story. So growing up, the photographers that inspired me in surfing were guys like Art Brewer, Patrick Treves, Pat Stacey's a great water photographer. Thomas Campbell always has a really interesting approach to surf photography. Yeah, those guys are kind of always inspiring me. Chris Burkhardt goes on these crazy cold adventures, and he's like the biggest workhorse of them all. Like he will do whatever it takes to shoot under northern lights, or then go on these crazy bike missions. So I think those guys kind of all inspire me. But as far as like the younger guys, I think, not the younger guys, but I've really been appreciating the work of Sarah Lee. I think she's making some beautiful images. Same with Ari Frapwell. It's been really cool to see his work go from just a full grommet in La Jolla to now he's swimming in some big waves and capturing some really nice water shots. Shane Grace that we talked about, Zach Noyle. Yeah, there's quite a few, but those guys, I actually think John Hook, if you haven't seen his work, he's doing this cool like film double exposure thing right now that's really neat.
And Hannah asks, what keeps you going, and how do you keep your creative energy flowing?
I think what kind of inspires me, I used to shoot photos every single day, and I felt like I needed to shoot photos every day to keep my skills up and to keep going. Now I find that sometimes I'll put the camera away for a little bit and I'll just go surfing, and then when I'm surfing I go, man, I wish I had a camera. That would be so cool to capture, and it almost like builds up this like pent up energy. So when you do finally take your camera out, you like have all these memories of when you were shooting or when you weren't shooting, and then you try and apply those visions to when you do have a camera. So I've actually found by shooting a little bit less, I'm coming at it with a little bit of a fresher perspective, a more excited perspective than just shooting every single day, day in and day out.
And I think we might have, you talked about this a little bit before, but Greg is asking, how important is the rule of thirds to your compositions?
Well, thank you for the question, Greg. I think it's important to understand the rules so you can break the rules. The rule of thirds is a very classically mindset of making images. It's very visually appealing. At the same time, sometimes having the center of focus is equally as important, and it creates balance in the frame. So I think you have to choose the image and choose the framing that best complements the scene. I remember reading Jenna and I, we went to an Henri Cartier-Bresson gallery, and they showed this short film of his work, and he actually edited all his images upside down. So it was more about the composition than it was about the subject matter. And so I'll tend to do that quite a bit, is I'll look at the images upside down. If they don't tell a story upside down visually, then it's usually not a very good photo. But I just like images to be kind of minimalist and just classic and clean. I try and minimize backgrounds and make it as easy to digest as possible.
Cool. And then there's a follow-up to the goggle question. Are you mostly shooting flat port underwater, or is dome the best?
I prefer a dome port underwater. With a flat port, your lens tends to magnify by 3, so it turns like a 20 mil into like a 28 or a 26 mil. So underwater, you're constantly battling to try and get an image as wide as possible. So I will try to have my images be as wide as possible underwater. So yeah, I'll typically always use a dome.
And then Charlie's asking, how do you set up your focus? Is it an auto or manual, or do you set a fixed focal point?
Underwater, I'll use an autofocus. Same with above water with a long lens, and then, but with a fisheye above water, I'll always use manual focus and tape down my lens so the focus ring doesn't slip when we're shooting in the water if we go over the falls.
And then let's see. Oz is asking, if you reach out to random good surfers you see on Instagram, do you think they'll generally be open to you shooting them?
I think so. I think surfers are all pretty creative in their own sense. That's what makes them good at surfing. That's what makes them unique and have a different perspective. I think if you're open and honest with them and just say, hey, I'm an up and coming surf photographer, I'm a surf photographer, or I'm a photographer that loves surfing, and I love the way you surf, and we live in the same area, I would love to collaborate with you. And if you present to them a good idea or a concept for an image, I feel like a lot of surfers, people in general, they're competitive. And so if you build a relationship and almost not challenge them in a negative way, but say, I love the front side air you do. How cool would it be if we did this with a full moon behind you or golden light? And you present them samples of your work that represent your type of vision, then you can build a great collaboration between each other. I feel like there's a lot of good surfers and there's a lot of good photographers, and sometimes there's a sense of entitlement of people thinking just because they're good at surfing, they should have good photos, or just because they're good at photography, they should have access to good subjects. It's a collaborative effort. And like I said, no one's really making a lot of money on this. So you just want to be around people that inspire you and you have fun with, because you're at the beach. It's a fun day.
And this one's funny. I had a tiger swim up to me the first time shooting in the water. Do you worry about sharks or tigers?
I do. Living in San Diego, we don't have tiger sharks, but we do have great whites. It's definitely something I think about. As much as I would like to say I don't think about it, I definitely do think about it. Swim at your own risk. Try not to swim around river mouths if after a rain. I don't know. It's a numbers game. I went to South Africa, and I put it in my contract I wouldn't swim in the water because I was too scared. But ended up swimming one day anyways. But that's use your own judgment. I think the chance of getting attacked is pretty low in Southern California, but don't quote me on that because stuff does happen. yeah, just be cautious, be conscientious of where you are. And, you know, there are a lot of times that you're swimming by yourself. So you just want to be, you know, you always want to be safe. You want to put your best foot forward. I just think maybe that's a little unlucky or lucky, depending on how you look at it. I've never seen a tiger shark, but I'm pretty sure that they've seen me. So that's kind of I don't know. That's a curious. I don't really know how to answer that one. Just be safe.
And then about editing, do you have your own presets, or how do you do it?
I don't. And so I heard that some people use presets, but I actually don't know how to use them. Like I said, I'm pretty I know just enough in Photoshop to do my contrast and curves and edits. And if I need to do any major editing work, I feel like my job as a photographer isn't really successful, because I really just want to combine good light with a clean subject matter. And if it takes a lot of post-production, then I don't know, you're not really doing it right. But some people use them and they say they're good. I haven't used them. I don't really know how to use those.
Well, we're just about out of time. Is there anything you'd want to wrap it up with?
Well, I just want to say thanks to everyone who submitted to the Glaser photo review, and also to you, Troy and Danielle, and the team at Patagonia for having me and hosting me, and then also to my wife Jenna, who has been working really hard behind the scenes to make this happen. So thanks for everyone for tuning in. Be safe and have fun. Photography it's a passion. It's a lot of fun. It's a great way to see the world. It's a great way to share your perspective of the world, and just be safe. It's a pretty weird time out there right now. So, thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks. All right, guys. Thanks for joining us. Until next time.
Yeah. See you guys. Thank you.